The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about planning, preparing, and operations for mass events. We're talking about FIFA World Cup, which is right in our forefront. It's coming up here, and if you weren't aware, then hopefully you are in such a remote area that it's not going to affect you, because if you are going to be affected, the planning need to start a long time ago. And so we're going to get into a lot of that. It's beyond large scale events like FIFA and World Cup. There's going to be a lot of tangible takeaways for municipalities and government bodies, organizations of all sizes. So I'm excited to bring on Irish Hancock and Adam Saynuck. So Irish, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. So when we talk about large scale events, mega events, Irish, can you give a little bit of an introduction to what you're doing professionally in Arlington, Texas, and what makes these events like FIFA World Cup so different than an already taxing, already resource and time and personnel sucking event like a Super Bowl, which you have familiarity with that too?
Yeah, I'll just start with Irish Hancock, Arlington, Texas, Office of Emergency Management. I'm the Emergency Management Administrator. I've been here 20 years. You mentioned the Super Bowl. We've done 4 World Series. We're doing the World Cup, NBA All-Star Game, the first college football playoff championship, and so on and so on and so on. Each one of them has their uniqueness. And to be perfectly honest, it really doesn't matter if it's a large scale international or national special event, whether it's your local county fair or whether it's your 4th of July parade in your jurisdiction or what have you. They all have their own unique challenges. And really what it comes down to is the number of partners you're dealing with. Usually you're dealing with the organizers, local officials, and what have you. When you get to the level of the Super Bowl, then you're dealing with the federal government, the state government, local partners. Although it may all be held in your jurisdiction, you're going to have a lot of moving parts for something along those lines. And all the other big events are somewhat similar. What makes the World Cup very incredibly unique to the scale that probably only the Olympics can touch is the fact that now you're dealing with different countries. You're not just dealing with a local official or a local group. You're dealing with actual countries, their uh, their consulates, their embassies, their security details and their security sections, intel groups, what have you. And then that also brings in a lot more federal agencies. Now we've got the Department of State. That's something you never deal with when you're dealing with, say, a Super Bowl. Or you're dealing with the Department of Defense. I think they're called Department of War now. You're dealing with those aspects of it. You're dealing with not just your normal partners like FEMA or the FBI, Secret Service, and the list goes on and on. I actually tried to compile a list of all the agencies that are involved in meetings that I attend. I personally, for the city of Arlington, have been planning for the World Cup since June of 2023. So almost 3 years ago. And going through all the meeting invites and looking at who all were attending the meetings, the list is over 80 different agencies between local partners, cities, counties, hospital groups, because this is going to be for North Central Texas, it's spread across the region. It's not like, say, the city of Houston, where 99% of the World Cup is in the city of Houston. Their org chart is very linear. You got one mayor, one city manager, one police chief, one fire chief. So it's not easy, but it's easier because it's all within the city of Houston. Whereas for us here in the North Central Texas region, it's spread across multiple cities. So you have multiple mayors, multiple city managers, multiple police chiefs, fire chiefs, and all the hospitals as well, because you can't flood Arlington hospitals if there is an incident. You have to spread them across. So now you have patient tracking amongst different hospital systems and what have you. As you can tell, the complications just start growing with the bigger the event is.
Right.
And then also when you're dealing with something like the World Cup, you can't just say call 911 in English. It has to be in 100 different languages, or at least the predominant languages of the teams that you know that are coming to your jurisdiction. It's one wrinkle after another. In the early stages of this, I started having panic attacks about how are we going to do this. So then I had to kind of, take a deep breath after a couple of days of sweating, and then just like, that phrase, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah.
And so just started picking one aspect of the World Cup and then just taking the next bite. And 2.5 years later, we're 72 days away, if I remember right, from our first match in Arlington. And yeah, just at this point, truly be careful what you ask for, because I was very excited at the thought of us potentially getting the World Cup. Now, 2.5 years later, I'm really looking forward to it to being over.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Irish. I love how you outlined so many things for folks to think about that's absolutely applicable to their scope, regardless of what their role is as professional staff, as the civilian, quote unquote, side of municipalities or counties or regions or states. At the same time, you've laid out all these things that are very relevant and very eye opening, I'm sure, for a lot of listeners. However, I'm also pretty sure that a lot of folks are going to hear all that and then do exactly as you recognize, which is start to feel that overwhelm of like, oh my gosh, there are all these things. Where do you start? And I love how you just say you start one bite at a time. And we'll come back to you on that. Like, how does someone approach that with systems or strategy? Adam, I want to go to you. If you can please introduce a little bit of your perspective and your role in this conversation professionally, and and maybe where you would invite people to think about data and information in that one bite at a time approach.
Sure thing. I'm Adam Saynuck. I'm the director of marketing at Activu. I come from the software world, and Activu is a software company. I think of the things that I've been doing in the software world and that I've always been a part of connect either people to products, people to information, or people to people. And what our software platform visibility does and the perspective that we take is connecting people to information and people to people. As Irish mentioned, this is some people are calling this the largest sporting event in human history. 48 teams, 11 US cities, a bunch in Canada and Mexico as well. 78 matches are going to be happening in the US alone. And something that we definitely recognize, and Irish and I have been talking about for a while, global football crowds are more rowdy than you typically get. And I
They're
think it has to do
impassioned,
with
right?
it's a passionate crowd, and I think it has to do with it's a volume and a rowdiness per person tends to be an amped up scale than what the US is maybe used to for sporting events and large events. And then also, as Irish has also discussed, the threat of issues happening and challenges is inside and outside the stadium, right? And so having visibility inside of the stadium, but then also a mile ring around it where transit is coming in, where traffic is happening, where people are gathering to celebrate before or after an event is all that stuff that you need to pay attention to. And then, from the direction that I come from, and help to, facilitate is how do you bring all of that together? And so that's the sort of angle that I bring into this, and that we've been sort of trying to bring to top of mind for a couple of years now. I think there's a number of reasons that we'll get into that things do feel a little bit scary as we enter it. Not the least of which is that it's just a gigantic event, but maybe there's some learning opportunities here too.
Yeah, certainly. And shout out to Adam for when we got connected and learned more about what y'all do. You're like, hey, I know the guy that we need to have in on this conversation. And that's where I got excited where this information is absolutely power, right? When we don't have the experience ourselves, which who does? In this level of event, nobody. Nobody does around here. And so to lean on the similar relative experiences, but then the planning that Irish and his region have been going through to share at scale for anybody to listen to and apply in. So thank you so much, Adam. So when we talk about this overwhelming amount of work and connections and collaborations and planning, it makes people think about any problem. And that goes to knowing your resources and your tools. And in some regard, we can start identifying some of these partners, but then it might feel like, okay, there's almost too many resources. So, Irish, in your estimation, maybe from your experience, like where would one start, or where would a team start hacking out some of these things to start laying out some framework?
Well, it depends on if it's all the planning is in your one organization, or is it outside of your organization? And they're similar in nature, but it's easier again if it's under one umbrella, being one organization, because now you have a hierarchy. Your bosses can kind of help, or the management can kind of start making the objectives known to the workforce, and then it's easier to bring people together when the management is saying we need to do X or Y. When it's outside of the organization, now you have to start being more collaborative. You have to start bringing people together. The biggest failure you can have on planning for a small event or a large scale event of any magnitude is going to be groups planning in a silo. You have to work together to have a deconfliction in the plans. The last thing you want is one group. Let me give you an example. We've got a group that we created what's called expert planning teams. You can look them as local planning groups or subject matter expert groups. All the different partners from around the region are brought in to be a part of these expert planning teams. We have one that's medical and public health. They have two components, two subcommittees under them, one that's about hospital coordination and EMS coordination and what have you. The other one is going to be dealing with more of the public health side of the world. After COVID, now everyone understands public health is a pretty big deal. Well, there's another expert planning team, what we call EPTs, it's fire services, and one of their subcommittees is EMS coordination. So, should there be a mass casualty incident, the EMS subcommittee's got a plan for how they're going to do that, where they're going to get additional resources, ambulances, EMS. You know, all of that is going to have to be planned by that subcommittee under the fire EPT. Well, at the same time, the Medical Public Health EPT Subcommittee for Hospital Coordination, if there's an MCI, they have to plan for how they're going to distribute those patients, not excuse me, not just in Arlington, but around the region, and potentially outside of the region as well, because you can't just flood one or two hospitals with 30, 40 people.
Hmm.
Those hospitals still have the objective to and duty to maintain space for other citizens' natural emergencies that occur outside of a special event. So now you have to spread them around the region to dozens or maybe hundreds of hospitals, and they've got to work on their plan for that. Well, if the fire EPT for EMS isn't working with the medical public health EPT for the hospital coordination, where the EMS resources are going to be coming from, their plans are gonna clash at the time that you actually need them to be successful, and in this case, when lives are on the line. That's the best takeaway I can give is you have to bring everyone into the fold that has a stake in the game to plan for together the worst case scenarios, or any scenario for that matter, much less the worst case scenarios. Because if you don't, you're already starting behind, and then you're having to play catch up in real time when you could have done it in advance when you had plenty of time to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for giving some specific examples of systems and groups of where people might recognize that something is going to become overburdened. And how does that affect not just that hospital, but then the other area hospitals, but then also the the hospitals outside of that window, because they're going to be affected, because these people need to go somewhere, and where are we going to give them the critical care? How are we going to transport them in a mass casualty event, right? So now, as we talk through an example, we're going to start identifying a lot of needs, but a lot of potential teams. And one of my biggest takeaways on everything that you're sharing is that these relationships and these awareness pieces of what these different teams do in their systems and some of their emergency management planning, we need to identify those things beforehand, right? So establish these these contacts, these relationships, these awarenesses of like who runs this hospital, and maybe yeah, who is the expert in this thing, so we're not reinventing the wheel and creating redundancies.
I think that
Exactly right. Go
I
ahead.
think that's part of the challenge of what Irish brings up here, which is the siloed systems, siloed teams, right? Irish knows everybody around, the Dallas area, but that's institutional knowledge and that's locked in his head and in his Rolodex, right? So what's he got to do is he's got to make sure that the rest of his team has access to them as well. And that's not just like able to call them, but how do I get information to other people who are part of that Rolodex? And how can I move that? We call that unified response. And, so making sure that agencies and organizations are connected digitally as well as through a variety of other means. Otherwise, you run into interoperability problems that you do not want to deal with when an emergency is happening.
Yeah.
Adam, you're showing your age. Kids don't know what a Rolodex is.
Yeah,
Filofax,
I
that's
do.
also
Yeah, so it's a little wheel with note cards attached. So for
It
the
is.
younger
it's
gen,
like
that's
it's
like
like the
a little.
internet, but you turn it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a manual thing that's sat on a desk or sits on a desk. But no, that's a huge thing for everyone. And that's for executive leaders right now to recognize what you just said, Adam, about Irish is that institutional knowledge. And there's a couple people in my organization that they hold the scepter with regard to that experience and that knowledge and those relationships. But people are going to keep retiring. And we have a very young industry in policing. We have a very young industry in firefighting. And so when we look at these things, when some of these people retire out as they are going to and as they have very well earned, how are we prepared with generally younger managers and leaders to take that on? Because in the absence of experience, we need proactive training. We need proactive reach out ownership of initiating these practices. So thank you so much for identifying that, Adam.
Yeah. In terms of folks retiring or the workforce continuing to change, I think that we're in actually a very very good position. That people who are very digitally native, right? You hand them an iPad the moment they were born. At this point, are joining the workforce in the spaces that can affect positive outcomes for the kind of events that we're talking about here. And so, in that sense, it's not trying to convince somebody that technology is part of the solution. It's really about making sure that you evaluate and connect them in ways that make them effective.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Adam. Maybe I could keep it with you, Adam, because as we talk about comms, as we talk about starting these interagency or interorganization meetings and things like that, quickly we can think about all these people that we could branch out to. But then how do we manage this TMI, right? There's too much information and too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? And that's why the perspective that we take, and not to keep giving a commercial for my software, but what visibility is a layer that it does three things. It allows access and connects everything that is on your network. So that could be a variety of technologies, right? You've got different camera makers. You've got Axon. They've got cameras. They've got fuses. They've got flock. But then you've got other camera makers that are part of the traffic management. You've got security cameras at venues. They probably are a different platform. So bringing that together into a place where you can share it and use it amongst a group of agencies that need to have access to it the moment that they need it.
From interviews to jail calls, Ditto Transcripts delivers fast, confidential, and court ready transcription for law enforcement agencies. Ditto is CJIS compliant and is already working with agencies all over the U.S., including the Washington State Patrol and the National Park Service Investigations Unit. Get started now at dittotranscripts.com. That's dittotranscripts.com. To hear details about all the applications of Ditto transcripts and exactly why this is a key solution for your organization's workload issues, check out episode 232. You train for the threats you can see, but what about the ones you can't? United Diagnostic Services brings hospital-grade diagnostic technology directly to first responder agencies, making early detection of cardiovascular disease and cancer more accessible than ever. UDS provides comprehensive early detection programs using advanced ultrasound, CT calcium scoring, stress echoes, and innovative blood panels to identify potential health risks long before symptoms appear. It's proactive, on-site, and built specifically for those who serve. Early detection saves lives and careers. Learn more at udshealth.com.
Other things like conferencing tools, there's QSIS and MS Teams and Zoom and things like that. Websites and applications. There's broadcast video and media and stuff like that. All these things. Oh, social media. Don't forget social media because that's a
Mm.
great indicator of when something might be going wrong or getting, in the planning stages of going wrong. So bringing all of those things together in an agnostic fashion for a seamless situational awareness is super duper important. And then you have to distribute it, right? You have to get it to the people who can do something about it. So that means you'd be able to get it into, an RTCC or in Irish's case, in an EOC. Maybe the PSAP, the 911 center has something that they need to know. Maybe there's, clinical command centers at your hospitals. You want them to be updated on what's going on. So being able to get that information to those different people, out to maybe you've got mobile command centers that are in the field on site and sharing that information back and forth. So that's a pretty big lift, and being able to sort of cover that from a platform perspective is important. And then lastly, this is a tremendous amount of information, as you mentioned. So being able to sort through that and find what is important, when it's important, where am I getting an alarm, what do I need to know so that I can act on it, and how do I get that to people who can do something about it? Well, we automate that. We use AI for that. It's very, very effective. And that is helping to reduce that cognitive burden and load so that people can get a quick time to response, whether that's a physical time to response or a digital time to response.
Yeah. No, thank you, Adam. And that really helps illustrate the actual mechanisms where all of this is working or how it's working. And so when we talk about that aspect, I want to go to Irish because that's a key challenge that he identified, which is managing the too many cooks in the kitchen. How do you keep everyone involved, informed, but then the right people involved and informed in the right way? Because one pet peeve of anyone is being involved in all these meetings where like I was just a fly on the wall and this really was a bit in the weeds and didn't apply to me. But at the same time, we risk under communicating. We know what that can create.
It is a challenge. That's the best way of describing it because, well, well, when you're talking events like Super Bowl or you're talking events like the World Cup, you're not hurting for people who want to be a part of the conversation. If anything, too many cooks want to be in the kitchen, and that's the harder part is how do you ensure you're including the right personnel? That's why, like in the group, the planning groups that we created through those expert planning teams, that's why we have subcommittees built underneath them so that it can expand and contract with all the different groups that want to be a part of it. You don't have to trust me, I don't have to ask agencies if they want to be a part of it. They start calling me, telling me they either needed to be or want to be, and in some cases they use their own political means to create pressure to involve them. And so it really comes down to building a system. You can't have a committee with 100 people in it. It's impossible. I mean, it's easy to do. It's easy to have way too many cooks in that kitchen, but you're never going to accomplish anything. I always say that when there's more than one person in a room, that means there's two different opinions. And you've got to have a structure in place. So you have to have more of your leadership group that are actually going to run the group itself, and then you create these smaller groups with everybody that can end up reporting back through their leadership of each of the subcommittees back to the leadership committee itself. Um, it does get a little daunting because you'll have communities that they swear they need to be involved. Well, why? Well, you might need my 6 police officers. No, I promise I'm gonna need 50 police officers, not 6. And so we're going to bigger resources. And so you gotta handle that politically, politely, "Thank you, we'll call you if we need you," type thing. But you gotta also be able to recognize who are the important partners that you need. You may want to only keep it local, but if the state comes knocking saying that they need to be a part of it, well, I'm pretty positive we're going to need some state resources. So yes, you start identifying those resources and you start inviting those groups that are responsible for those state resources. The problem is how much of the state do you involve when every agency with the state wants to be involved? In that case, you start identifying who's gonna be the spokesperson for the state and charging them with responding back to the other state agencies about the progress. So you have to kind of create some barriers or guardrails to prevent overloading the planning groups, and you do that by being creative and finding ways where you can create off roads for those groups to be adjacent to the main planning group by having a spokesperson report back to them and keep them updated. Because really what I'm finding is there's a lot of times where people are more annoyed because they don't know. It's not because they're not participating, but it's because they don't know. And one of the expert planning teams They've started hosting monthly meetings, and it's really listen only conference calls. And they invite everyone in the region. There's several hundred individuals, dozens and dozens of private partners, public partners, whatever. And they update literally the world on everything they're doing to kind of stem that we aren't being kept up to date. And really what it comes down to why they're saying that, why they're not being kept up to date is they're more concerned about a last second, hey, we need your resource. So now by them doing that, they've stemmed that tide and curtailed those concerns by keeping them updated, but which allows that EPT to still keep planning in their smaller leadership environment with their own subcommittees without having a committee of 100 plus people and nothing ever getting accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Irish. You outlined a few things or a lot of things. You could really do like a 2-week clinic on managing the political nature of not hurting feelings, working diplomatically with our partners, right? Because everyone's important. And it is like this all matters. And I appreciate how you outline these things. And then also there's a few really good things, right? We don't have an absence of people wanting to help. And so absolutely, hey chief, you got 6 officers over there. I'm not discounting you, but maybe the more relevant role for those 6 officers is assisting the county when all the deputies are sucked into the actual mass event, right? But then
Absolutely.
also, chief, you still got emergencies that happen, and maybe it's a slower agency, but what happens if there is the big event completely outside of this thing? There's a mass shooting. Are you just deploying all your people and no one can respond to that, right? So we had to think responsibly about that. Even as you're talking, it reminds me of a conversation we had offline, which is about yeah, entity like state highway patrol, right? Huge agencies, regardless of the state. However, if you are hosting this mass regional, national, international event, then it's not just the state patrol or highway patrol going to Houston. It's Dallas, it's Houston, it's everywhere, right? And all these little ancillary areas. Are there protests that are happening on the freeways because of this event? Are there opportunists, anarchists, what have you, whoever, whatever you want to call them? So are we able to be nimble? And that's a word I wrote down here as you're talking about building out and shrinking down. And I think that that's a really helpful thing when you recognize we do need structure, we do need hierarchy, because yes, you're absolutely right. When you add one more person in, it just makes that red tape a bit thicker each time. And a key strategy you identified is listen only, right? That is a gift of the digital age. Sometimes you don't get to turn your camera on. Sometimes you don't have the ability to even turn your microphone on because this is just for info sharing. There are a few people that are moderating this and we have to figure stuff out and we're blasting it out. You can be on the newsletter, you can be on the updates. Adam, anything you want to add to that aspect?
Sure. I mean, Irish is spot on because he's an excellent manager of people. There's two specific social engineering things that are important that Irish mentioned. One is the people always want to know what's going on, right? Communication and expectation management are some of the top priorities, particularly in an event like this. And the other thing that I've certainly recognized in my career is I get a lot more agreement and participation and move things quicker when I include people in the workshop phase. And so people who can affect the change later on, being involved in the decision making and the architecting of it early on. Again, you don't want 1,000 cooks in the kitchen, but pick the right people. Having them involved early on, they feel ownership through the whole process and can help you to move things quicker when you need to. And so finding those champions and making them a part of it early so that they feel ownership is a big piece of this.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. As I said, we could go on and on, but we hit a lot of main prongs. Irish, I just want to see what aspects that you feel are really relevant to highlight again for these mass regional events, as well as maybe that is the state championship football game that this town or these towns are really needing to put their heads together and collaborate on.
Well, let's start at the big scale and then I'll go down. When it comes down to like your really, really big events, and especially something that might spread beyond your own jurisdiction to other jurisdictions as well, you have to start identifying who are going to be your mutual aid partners. In our case, in Arlington. So when we held the Super Bowl, the game was in Arlington. The hotel space for the NFL and for the teams were in Dallas and Fort Worth. The reason why I highlight those is the fact that they are not gonna be able to support us if something goes wrong, at the game because their resources are needing to be kept closer to home in case something happens at the hotels or the meeting spaces where the teams are at, the practice facilities, what have you. So then we have to start looking at uncommon mutual aid partners, ones that we don't normally deal with. So in our advanced planning now, we're having to identify other jurisdictions saying, we might need backfill from you for one of our public safety aspects or what have you. So then we have to start kind of moving out further away from Arlington to get those resources to assist us should something go boom or all our resources are being forced to respond. And now we have to have backup resources, backfill, stage at a fire station, what have you, in case another emergency in the city occurs that has nothing to do with the special event itself. When you're smaller jurisdictions or smaller events, not even smaller jurisdictions, you still need to identify where your mutual aid partners are coming from. I always joke, and I'm sure my staff is sick of the joke, but it's I'm paid to be the most paranoid person in the city of Arlington. That's what emergency management is. That's why we have emergency management plans. And to be honest, most times you don't know if it's a good plan until something does occur. And then that's why you have, and I know you're aware of this being in public safety, that's why you have after action to identify what went right so you can make sure you repeat that in the future, but also what went wrong so you can fix that so that's not repeated in the future. So with being paranoid, it's okay, what if something happens where it takes the bulk of our resources to respond to? Where do we start getting those other resources from? So if you're a jurisdiction that your biggest event is a parade or what have you, you can never rest on your laurels to say we're resource rich. You're only resource rich until you're not and until that event happens. And when that event happens, now you're scrambling to find additional resources to help offset, to support, to fill in for whatever the event is that has used up your resources. So that parade or that county fair or whatever it might be, you've got to be thinking outside the box when you're planning for it. It may be something that your jurisdiction or your agency has done for 50 years and it's always worked. Well, the problem that I am always trying to circumvent and the thing that I hate to hear in meetings when we're planning is, well, that's the way it's always been.
Mm,
Well, now there's a lot of things that have always been until something happens and then all of a sudden it's a new day. And so it's better to plan for the worst case scenarios and be pleasantly surprised that everything went well than to have to course correct in the middle of an event because you didn't plan enough. And now you're putting lives at danger, you're expending your resources, you're making life way harder in a very tense environment than it needs to be if you haven't planned enough for it.
yeah. Thank you so much, Irish. There's several things that I love that I want to just re-highlight and rewind back to, and that's that paranoia. And there's a lot of adages, especially in law enforcement, policing, emergency response, emergency management, which is why do I why would I call myself paranoid? I'm prepared, right? Like I have all these contingency plans. And that is what makes us experts is assuming and prepping for the worst. And there's so much material, there's so much information out there that reveals that event planning and contingency planning helps you, even if it goes completely differently than what you expected, right? There's a lot of sayings about how your plan never survives first contact, but it doesn't mean don't plan. It means that now you're more adept in recognizing some of these similar things and some of these quote unquote wicked problems that may emerge, and you've developed the reps to work through and adapt to the problem. So I love that. I love how you talk about the after action, the critical after action, because one could say how well your next event goes may be dependent and influenced by how your last after action went. And a short story I'll share: when I was a street sergeant, we went out and we assisted a neighboring agency with a triple homicide. And it was the deceased were out in a parking lot. It was after a bar closing, and all these family members and friends and patrons were showing up, and they started creating this semi crowd control issue. So me and my officers were on the outskirts trying to preserve the crime scene, and the other agency was inside. We went to an after action later where it was all high fives because everything worked out great. They asked for help, but we exchanged glances in my agency because we felt like we were just about overwhelmed. And if we look at it outcome based, we would say, or they did say, hey, it was a win. But we were like, we need more resources. Like, it only went well because it went well, but it was not set up to go well. And so I think that that's a valid thing to look at when we're planning is like, are we being honest with ourselves? And are we actually prepared? Because just doing it the way we've always done it, that doesn't work when you're encountering new challenges that we've never done. So thank you so much for outlining those examples. Adam, I want to go to you and see where you would like to fill in the blanks, kind of review, and then anything else that we didn't cover.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely a great learning experience, the FIFA World Cup 26 here. I know that LA is going to school on this for the 2028 Olympics, which is great because they're giving themselves time to react and prepare and proact. I think that one of the things that is very clear because it's such a massive scale on this one is that the way that cities, particularly smaller agencies and smaller areas, fund projects requires you to pay attention much earlier and be a much better planner and do it earlier and get all those champions earlier because the way that the funding worked for this particular thing, just to talk about something specific, is the funding has only just arrived. I think it was last month for the municipalities that had applied for it. And when the funding through FEMA was launched for this, the application process happened at exactly the time that the government shut down in the fall. And so applications couldn't even be processed. I was speaking to folks in California who were trying to apply, couldn't find the right information. I called and spoke to FEMA, and I was talking to a skeleton staff there who were like, we don't have the access to be able to get the information that we need for these people. And so it was a rush to get it together at the end, and now it's a rush to use the money. Or maybe you had to sort of spend it on credit in advance. Either way, it required a lot of planning. So, um, don't wait for don't wait for somebody else to rescue you. I think is a big lesson there. Plan far in advance. Audit your information silos. We've already talked about that. I think it's super duper important. Audit your technology stack. Um, run tabletop exercises in advance, as Irish talked about. Put somebody on social media. Make sure that they're checking the streams that are going to help to inform you if something is developing. Connect your information and people, and plan your post-batch response as well. It all matters, and you can't take a deep breath until probably days after it's over, is my guess.
So thank you so much, Adam and Irish. You both have helped us illustrate all of these key factors, these skills, these strategies, these relationships, these components to planning. And that's everything from the local event, the local parade, to something that is going to span county lines and state lines and international borders with travelers in a very robust, passionate fan base. And I just want to turn it back over to you each real quick so people can reach out and contact you if they have any questions or there's resources that you can provide with people. Fun follow up. So, Irish.
Um, all right. So Irish Hancock, you can shoot me an email at irish Hancock at Arlington TX ARLINGTONTX.gov. Shoot me some email or emails, any questions that you have or thoughts. I'll be happy to answer it. Obviously, understand that 72 days out, as we get closer, it gets harder and harder for me to keep up with all the stuff that's coming in, but eventually I will respond, I promise.
Great. Thank you so much, Irish. And Adam.
Yeah, Eric, I love that you're building a community that people can rely on to get information, to learn what other people have already learned, and to do a better job and move quicker moving forward. I see this in other organizations too, and it's very, very helpful for the members of those organizations. So, yeah, keep it up. Feel free to contact me, Adam, ADAM, dot Saynuck, SAYNUK, at activu.com, ACTIVU.com. And happy to help and point you in direction of any resources that I know are available and other folks like Irish who also have different experience in different realms.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen, both so much.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.